Croeso I Comisiwn Masnach a Business. Welcome to all our witnesses today to the UK Trade and Business Commission. The title of today's session is Barriers to Trade and Small Businesses, Case Studies from the Frontline. My name is Liz Saville-Roberts. I'm chairing the session today, and I'm the parliamentary leader of Plaid Cymru in Westminster. Right, I really want us to take the opportunity first thing this morning to hear from businesses who are affected, and the questions that we've outlined have been to help you illustrate the situation, your experiences, what might be done to alleviate situations, or to talk about some situations which may be opportunities. I'm going to read out the 4 questions which you've been presented with, and there is an allocated commissioner. There is an allocated commissioner who will be asking a few more questions. Forgive us, we do have 12 minutes each. If I need to, I will have to cut across you and ask you to, as courteously as I can, just to make sure that we have enough time. But if I have to do that, I just wanted to emphasize how grateful we are that you've been prepared to give us time this morning and to tell us about your experiences. So the 4 questions are: please briefly outline the nature of your business and the trade done with EU member states and other countries. 2, what impact have the changes in EU trading relationships had on your business? What is the likely long-term impact on sales, workforce, or future plans? This, I imagine, will be the most significant part. The 3rd question: have you sought or received any support in adapting new trading relationships? What support would be of most use? And 4thly, are there new opportunities your business could explore? And have you participated in any government consultations on trade deals? What would be the single most useful thing the government could do to help you? Right, if I could turn now to Kenneth McCartney of Verda Limited from Castleford, Yorkshire, and Paul will be helping you with questions along the way. Over to you. Thank you very much, Kenneth.
Okay, good morning. Is somebody going to ask me questions, or what would you like me to do?
If you could talk us through your business's experience, first of all, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll share screen here. I'll go through very quick. I'll go through the presentation very quickly. Remembering you've only got this 12 minutes. So can we go? Yes. So company name is Verda Limited. Who are we? We are a company who produces pumps and sells them around the world. Around 70% of the business is from here is being sold into Europe. The rest around the world. Yeah. We also buy pumps in from Europe and sell them in UK. Yeah. The business model we have is dependent on what we call drop shipments. That means selling to distributors in Europe, but supplying directly to customers. Yeah, which means where we have got we need to separate invoices and go through customers with separate invoices. Yeah. In preparation for Brexit, to answer some of the questions that come up, we also went the extra mile and qualified as AEO, Authorized Economic Operator. So a lot of effort put into preparing for being best of breed, really, as far as export-import goes. Our turnover European part is around £7 million per year. And Verda, as an employer, as a complete employer in the UK, employs over 500 people. Here in Castleford, we've got 65. So that was just the export model, is that we get orders from distributor, the distributor orders from us, we sell, the sale goes to the distributor in Europe, but we send the goods directly to the customer. What's new, of course, from Brexit is that we've got now this guy, the EU customs in between, and that's where a lot of the things are starting to go wrong. Just from the experience that we've had to sort of pull this information out of the systems of UPS and DAXA, because the information that they can give back on what's happening with the dispatches is extremely poor. So we've been working with 2 or 3 people here for months trying to get behind this and to follow this. You can see here, for example, we've got 127 deliveries, 228 are taking more than 5 days. Normally we're on 3 days to Europe. Yeah? So massive disappointment on that. Yeah? Then we've got here, for example, we went this even here, so we went at some stage said this isn't good enough. So after the 15th second, in order not to lose our customers who are dependent on getting their spare parts, we went and decided to make the decision to do it express. Now, express goes through a different hub. It goes through Cologne, which are air hubs who had practiced teams of customs officers, as opposed to, let's say, land hubs in Germany, where the customs weren't prepared and weren't even there really in any sort of force, yeah, because they didn't need it before, yeah. So we ran into a lot of trouble here, and even now, even with the express, we're seeing we're also getting a lot of things on express with very high costs, still taking more than 5 days to get to Europe. Yeah? I'll just go one up here. We can see here at the worst of times, we had up from January, we had up to 68 days to get a package over to Europe, yeah, in some cases. Yeah? And we've had to fight and look for it and try to find out where it was. Yeah? In some cases, we've had to, in many cases, we've had to replace. We've actually got, I think, 71 dispatches lost with a value of about £50,000. On the other hand, so that was UPS, that's packages up to 30 kilograms. Here is with pallet supply. So Daxa, for example, big companies we worked very well with, didn't even turn up for the first 6 weeks. They just stopped. DHL stopped anything. So we were very, very lost in the first 6 weeks. Daxa at the moment, with a lot of very intensive work with ourselves, are beginning to get there, yeah? But it's still very, very difficult, also depending on which country it's going into. And you can see here that we also measure here into which country it's going and how many days it's taking. So we've got a lot of evidence on this here to help us to see this. Yeah? We also went to a second one because Daxa didn't turn up, Europa, and ran into similar problems. And I'm head of a group here talking to other manufacturing companies from Fta in the UK, and all similar problems. So one's working with TNT, one's working with UPS. The problems are very similar. So, and this is to the questions I think you're going to ask. So the problems delivery, particularly to UPS and German, Polish and Czech customs, they seem to be the heavy points. Breach in information chain from customs back to forwarder. So if it stops somewhere, there's no information coming back why and where and what to do. Massive problem is certificate of origin, that the preferential trade agreements that Europe had have been copied more or less from UK, but that only goes for goods that are manufactured in the UK or a certificate of origin UK, which means that any reseller business buying in from Europe and selling worldwide cannot take part on the preferential trade agreements anymore. So, and this means a massive loss of reseller business bought from Europe and resold worldwide. What impact was change stuff? This is into the questions actually, if you want to ask, but I can read them out. So the impact on the EU trade is a massive impact on being able to keep our competitive business model running, which is drop shipments, which may now result in parts of the business being moved to mainland Europe and thus endanger jobs and turnover in the UK. Have you sought or received any support in adapting trading relationships? We sought help from the Chamber and the Chamber International. We achieved AEO status and take any seek and take any advice we can get. The best help at the moment would be to ensure that the forwarders and the European customs are aligned and that information flow improves massively. That's the single biggest thing that other people can do that I can't influence any more than we were trying to do. Our business model was running pretty perfectly. This will no longer be the case. So even long term, that fence is still going to be there. It might not be as bad as it is now or was, but it will always be comparatively worse. Yeah? Have you participated in any government consultations? We already trade with the rest of the world, and we see no improvement for this business that Brexit offers. You know? I know this is very dependent on individual tariff groups, but for our type of business, it's absolutely no advantage, more disadvantage. Yeah, so that's my part.
Well, can I come in, Kenneth, and thank you very much for your experience is kind of shared by some of my constituents. I'm just down the road in Sheffield, right. Including a local pump manufacturer. Right. But I was kind of impressed by the story you told us about the preparation that you did to be sort of oven ready But I wondered if you could just develop a little bit more the problems that you were having. I mean, you mentioned rules of origin.
Yes.
I mean, could you just explain a little bit more what that,
Well,
in practical terms? I mean, we're aware of the framework, but what that means, how that's panning out in practical terms for you?
Well, we produce pumps here, so there's no question about that. They're certificate of origin UK, but anything we're buying in from Europe and reselling them, they can no longer participate in the preferential trade agreements, because the preferential trade agreements, although copied from Europe, are only then valid for a certificate of origin UK, whereas before they were valid for manufactured in Europe. So that's a massive difference. And I don't know if that difference was really taken into consideration when the continuity agreements were made.
I mean, we've been talking about rules of origin problems with other sectors in general terms. I mean, what proportion of non-UK components do you have, perhaps, in your?
It depends on the mix, but in some areas it's quite high. Proportion is difficult to get, but high enough to be significant, I'd say.
Okay, but it's across a broad range of products, and it's causing a broad range of problems.
Yes.
Okay, you talked also about aligning forwarders and customs.
Yes.
Could you explain that to me a little bit more?
Yes, I'll try to explain that on one case. For example, UPS are using a hub in Germany. Their land hub is in Bochum. There is a team of customs, a very small team of customs officers there, whereas in Cologne, when it goes by air, there are big teams practiced. So that's the first point. The second point is, for example, we had arranged, done a lot of studying in this, to do consolidated dispatches. That means if we were sending 10 packages to Germany per day, we could do one customs event and pay for it once. That's one export, one import done, But the German customs, for example, are insisting that if it's consolidated, that it all comes in one lorry. That doesn't work with the UPS system of working. So those two things are not aligned.
Right. Okay.
That's quite massive difference if you're paying for 10 export-import events per day or one. So we were told this would all work, and it turns out it all doesn't work. So we've got to go back now and go back onto single events.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Paul and Kenneth. I think we're going to have to move on. Forgive me. It's really interesting to hear your story, but I'm just afraid that we're going to have to be with time. And thank you, Paul, as well. Could I turn now to Lyle Martin from Colorado?
Hey. Can you all hear me? I'll take a nod. Yep, good. First of all, my name is Lyle Piper. I am from a company called EA Martin & Son. We're a wholesaler of hand tools throughout the island of Ireland. 80% of our business would have come from importers or branded tools from GB into Northern Ireland. The other 20% would come from rest of world and Europe. The rest of world and Europe pieces really don't have a tremendous change. There are cost implications, there are logistics implications, and there are some timing implications. But for the 20%, it is, for all intents and purposes, manageable. For the 80% that comes from east to west across the Irish Sea, that will be my focus today. And the focus is not solely for EA Martin as a wholesaler of hand tools, but I'm representing maybe 12, 13, 14 other businesses, A, in the same sector and B, in the food sector, who are having the same issues as we are. Dealing with the east-west movement, the key thing for us is that we have now put international trading terms down the middle of the Irish Sea. And as such, none of us want to get involved in the Northern Ireland Protocol and the politics of that. But in putting those international trading terms down the middle of the Irish Sea, what we have ended up doing is we have, for all intents and purposes, made a difference within our own nation, i.e. that of GB, Northern Ireland or United Kingdom. In terms of that United Kingdom piece, if I have an importer, and I'll give a branded name like Stanley Tools, we as a smaller, lower down entity within their supply chain, obviously they're manufacturing in bulk, they're supplying, they're buying in bulk from third countries. And as we receive those goods here into Northern Ireland for further distribution, they do dictate the terms that we use. So in a lot of cases, particularly for branded tools, we don't have the negotiation power to say we want it delivered at place or we want it delivered duty paid. It normally gets stamped onto us. If I take an example of a branded tool that delivers to myself as duty paid, but delivers to one of my competition as delivered at place. And the reason why they would deliver at place to my competition is because they solely operate in Northern Ireland, whereas this business that I represent operates 70% in Northern Ireland and 30% back into other EU states, predominantly the Republic of Ireland. So if it gets to me delivered duty paid, there could be up to a 12% differential between what I buy in and what my competition buys in, yet we're operating in the same marketplace. So all of a sudden, you know, the margins in this game are very small, but all of a sudden we have a situation whereby in our own country, in the United Kingdom, we are now not competing on equal terms. If the international trading terms across the Irish Sea differ between the same importer distributor based in the UK or the Great Britain in the first place. Other things that come into play then in that east-west movement is obviously additional costs. No one in the business group that I represent are against the Northern Ireland Protocol, but what we are is we're saying, okay, we agree that Europe needs to protect itself from a security and safety point of view. We understand the need for checks on the agriculture sector. We understand the need for food checks, but what we don't understand is why the international trading terms down the middle of the Irish Sea. Because in effect of those international trading terms, and here's our proposal, we're down the middle of our businesses, then we have a choice. Do we want to trade solely in Northern Ireland, or do we want to trade back into the EU states, wherever that EU state may be? We have a choice. Putting the international trading terms down the middle of the Irish Sea has caused enormous time constraints, enormous hassle. There has been tremendous good works by the HMRC in terms of having a system TSS to assist. But again, that only represents about 15% of the movements that I get from the UK mainland. The other 85% is coming through clearing agents, of which I have absolutely no insight, no control. And I'm feeling as if I can't sleep in my bed at night because I don't have a control of that element anymore. And yet, from an HMRC legal point of view, I'm accountable for everything that goes back into the EU as an at-risk business. So there is a conscious need to really focus on that international trading terms down the middle of the Irish Sea and say to ourselves, the clearing charges, the heat treated pallets, as my colleague there a few minutes ago, Kenneth, said, in terms of the business operation, there's no consistency between the various freight agency logistics companies. It's again, it's a free economy out there. People can charge as they will. But for instance, you would have a clearing charge up to £45 for maybe a pallet. If there's 10 commodity codes in that, it could be £5 for each commodity code. All of a sudden, you're getting £1,000 worth of materials in to sell on, but that now has become 1,045 plus your heat treated pallet plus extra costs that maybe your local haulier has put into place as well, because they're no longer getting the volume of shipments through, and therefore costs are increasing. Our estimation is that costs for the products that we represent that come through Great Britain have gone up some 15% on average. And that is a tremendous hike. Now, let's ignore COVID out of that. Let's ignore other aspects of normal inflation. But at this point in time, we're looking at that sort of factor. Here, we have now gone to a situation where we used to buy what we called in bulk. Now we have to buy in tremendously large quantities to be able to receipt those goods in, simply because UK or Great Britain importers don't really want the hassle. And why should I have a hassle weekly when I can have it monthly from you? When I buy those goods in monthly, then all of a sudden I'm running into space issues. I'm running into other costs in terms of outside storage. I'm running into other costs in terms of the time element and all of this. Just want to go back to the point of the unfettered access across the Irish Sea. If those international trading terms were down the middle of our businesses, the key is here, prior to Brexit, we had done tremendous work in terms of commodity codes, of which this business has got 344. It takes us roughly an hour and a half to do one TSS supplementary declaration on average. We have had 186 to date, and there's only 13 of us in this business, but the reality is it's killing us. But it's also killing all of the businesses that I represent in terms of wholesale, in terms of the time and effort. And everybody wants to do it, and everybody wants to do it right. But the transparency and accountability for us is simply not there when we use the clearing agents and the third parties. And we have no control of that because they're supplier controlled, i.e. higher up supplier, or they're logistics operator controlled, who really don't know either business, either the importer's business in the UK in the first instance, or our business. The other aspect is about the human element of all of this. The resource and the time taken and the stress within business. And I don't mean to be flippant about the thing in terms of stress, but a lot of businesses in Northern Ireland are just small family-run businesses. And everybody, as I say, wants to do the right thing, wants to run by the rules, have completed and have engaged with all the various trade and help bodies. But those trade and help bodies such as Intertrade Ireland, Invest Northern Ireland, all they can do is put us on the roadmap as to where we're at. But the HMRC roadmap is not unclear because they're introducing, or they've implemented the international trading terms, but it is unbalanced because no one has looked at we believe, looked at the operational aspects in terms of the time, in terms of the complexity, and in terms of the accountability. But yet there is a solution, and that is putting those international trading terms down the middle of our business and saying to ourselves, we had Interstrat before Brexit, we had EC sales lists before Brexit, we still have those after Brexit, and really all we're doing now is putting in the country of origin, and we're breaking it down to a lower level as to who was the originating supplier. Did it come from GB, manufactured in GB? Did it come from GB, imported from the rest of the world? Did it come from Europe? And what we're really saying is, let's take that as if it was a VAT return, and anything that a business wants to trade back into the EU again, let's put that in the form of a VAT return and say, here's everything that came in from Europe that went back into Europe. Here's everything that came in to GB from Europe that's gone back into Europe. Here's everything that's come from the rest of the world into GB that demands duty, and do that like a VAT return, get our duty payable, and let's operate fairly across the island of Ireland, because we don't want to be any different than our European partners or our European competition in the south of Ireland or elsewhere in Europe. We simply want to be on equal trading terms. So that's the key points we have. In terms of the strategy going forward, we're spending so much time now on Brexit, and we understand that the minimum aid, we could actually go ahead and get the dividend back again. We can actually get duty back and be at a status quo. But the investment of time and labour and the decision to whether to employ someone or another couple of people at 20,000, 30,000 pound each, and that's low. But if we could get someone at that level, here we are, 20,000, 30,000 pounds that don't need to be because of the lack of simplicity in process. So de minimis aid is an option, but that de minimis aid, again, if it's used on the import side of things, that's 100% of the cost. Whereas if it's used in the back into the EU piece, then that's a much lesser cost. And as such, again, there is no visibility of de minimis aid and where we stand with that.
Okay, Lyle. If I could just bring in Stephen Farry, I'm afraid, very briefly, if you would.
Yes, thanks, Liz. Lyle, you're very welcome. We're extremely tight for time. Just want to ask a two-part question briefly. First of all, have you any recommendations in terms of improving the nature of the government support in terms of trader support service and other interventions from HMRC? Could it be better streamlined, for example? And secondly, do you think the definitions around things like goods at risk need to be reconsidered in some shape or form?
Goods at risk, I don't think. I think everybody's clear on what goods at risk are. If it moves back into the EU, then it's at risk, full stop. But again, if what's not clear is if I'm a retailer sat on the border in Northern Ireland, I don't think that clarity is there. And I'll argue the point as a larger business that why should I be different than they are? So, but I don't think there's any problem with the at-risk piece of it. The TSS is only 15% of what we do. The other 85% comes in elsewhere, and I speak for not myself, but other traders in this same distribution environment. We are, should I say, the conduit to the lifeblood of many businesses. And the TSS and Frank Demura and Shankar Zingham, I have been in direct contact with them. I've given proposals in terms of how we simplify the process. But in doing so, what we're doing is we're hiding the detail. And to be fair, I feel we're being dishonest to our European colleagues, because we're bulking things up when in effect, what I've proposed there in terms of putting the international trading terms down the middle of our businesses gives you 100% transparency, 100% accountability, and 100% of duty, which we can use NI8 against, but at least we can sleep in our beds at night knowing that it's done and done properly. And I'll give an example and I'll finish on it. It takes me 2.5 hours, roughly, through spreadsheets and through the way we've set ourselves up to run a month-end report for everything that moves into the EU and the purchase order values and the duty payable in that. It takes me 1.5 hours for every TSS that I do, and that's only 15% of my business. And there's 186 of them to date. So 186 times an hour and a half is the extra hours that myself and one other colleague has done. It is crazy. And there's no accountability.
Thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stephen, as well. Right, if I could turn now to Lee Jones of Fluorochem, please.
Hi, I'm Lee Jones, Director of Fluorochem. We've been around 50 years or over 50 years. We supply research chemicals into academic institutions, pharmaceutical companies. We have 190,000 different compounds. We supply everybody from University of Oxford to AstraZeneca to Roche in Switzerland. Bulk of the business is UK and Europe. Last year was £14.5 million turnover, 37.7% UK, 51% EU. We have 1,700 customers, 1,100 of which are in the EU. So the easiest example to give you is, prior to Brexit, we could ship next day to a chemist in University of Amsterdam. We could receive the order on a Monday, pick it, pack it, dispatch it with DHL. It would arrive there the Tuesday at the goods in, and the chemist gets the goods. Immediately after Brexit, what happens is we receive the order from the chemist that's gone via a procurement department in a different building through a system to our building. We process the order, we ship it with DHL or FedEx. Before it arrives now at the customer, DHL or FedEx are looking for customs charges, whether it's duty, VAT, and multi-line charges. And there's no way the goods in department nor the chemist can pay for that. So immediately from January, for the first 6 weeks of the year, there was products. I mean, DHL tell you there was 86,000 shipments stuck in Germany with DHL. It was a horrendous problem. So there's no way that chemist now, where we only supply business to business, can receive those orders next day from Europe. It's completely impossible. So even with a free trade agreement, there's still the VAT and customs element, which cannot be resolved at the moment. So the way we've combated that is we've had to set up a Fluorochem Ireland and a Fluorochem Netherlands, which is acting as third-party warehousing. We're packing up the orders in the UK, shipping them with DHL into Ireland or into Netherlands, already have packed them up to then be collected again by DHL from Ireland or the Netherlands and delivered onto the end client. It's an absolutely crazy system. So we're paying 6.5% duty on the way in from. We've got £8.3 million of purchases in 2020, of which over 5 million were Chinese. That's 6.5% duty pretty much on all of that coming in. We pay it in the UK, we ship it then into Ireland or the Netherlands. To clear that into the EU, we pay another 6.5% duty, the same as what my colleagues have said a moment ago, multi-line charges. We've got 100 commodity codes on a particular shipment. Above 5 commodity lines, you get a €5 or £5 charge for every single line. We've spent £250,000 last year on IT systems. We're about to spend the same amount of money again this year to set everything up now on a multinational or multi-company level. So we'd spent the last 3 years building brand new websites, ERP systems that were geared up for Fluorochem and as a sole entity. Now we're having to look at Fluorochem Ireland, Fluorochem Netherlands, Fluorochem the UK, and we need completely new systems in to deal with that. So we've lost a lot of clients at the minute from Europe. We're having to ship on DDP, to maintain some of the people. So we've got institutes, academic institutes that are performing research that need those chemicals next day. And we're now taking a hit on the VAT, so that and VAT and duty, so that we're shipping on a DDP basis from the UK to the end clients, where typically if we made 35%, we're now losing money on those orders just to satisfy the orders. So there's no way at the moment we can reclaim the VAT back from the UK without working through either our Floricam Ireland or Floricam Netherlands. And then we've got the issue with the double duty. So I've got the same concerns as the other two colleagues, so I won't go over that, but that's a broad picture of our business at the moment.
Okay, thanks very much, Lee. Professor Shira West.
Thank you, Lee, for that very clear analysis. I just have a very broad question. So you've clearly had to adjust your business quite significantly over the last few months in relation to the changes post-Brexit. In the longer term, if nothing changed, where do you see your business going? And okay. The second part of that question, which you said in the written evidence very clearly, is what kind of support you feel you need to improve the situation. Okay, so we've investigated every possible solution. So we're a UK-based business. We've been UK-based for over 50 years. We employ 50 staff in the UK at the moment. We're based on the edge of East Midlands, so I got hold of the person that was responsible for the free port implementation at East Midlands. We seem light years away from implementing anything like that. That would mean relocating UK to there anyway. So in a nutshell, if nothing is resolved this year, because we cannot afford to sit around and wait for things to potentially come out in 12 months or 2 years, we will relocate. We've got nearly 50,000 products sat in the UK, over 200,000 bottles. I will be shipping most of those into the Netherlands to set up a brand new facility and only bring in the UK what I need to supply in the UK. It is impossible to remain competitive in Europe by shipping from the UK on the current methods. Thank you very much. Liz, do we need to move on? Or
I think, can I just raise one tiny point there? When I was reading your evidence, Lee, what struck me was just the reality of, say, dealing with the university in the Netherlands. Yeah, that you would have one person making the order. This would then generate things that they were supposed to do, but the finance department wouldn't appreciate that, and it was just running into a dead end, basically. I mean, you had that experience already, yeah? Yeah, that's. I mean, it was the easiest way, and in hindsight, and hindsight's a great thing. In hindsight, if I would have looked at our other customers, for example, you mentioned other trade countries. We deal with every country in the world to some level. And we didn't realise, so for example, Switzerland, we've got a Swiss distributor where we know that the academic institutions won't order from us because they don't want the customs issues. And if I would have thought back in 2016 of that model, I would have already been set up in Europe a long time ago, because I would have anticipated that problem. But we cannot, those chemists cannot afford those delays, and we have to service them next day. Lovely. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for being. I found your evidence, the written evidence, very striking as well. Right. Lovely. If I could turn to Alan Mitchell of Foxglide. Can I just say also, I've got a quarry in the constituency that used to make curling stones. So I have a sort of vested interest in one way or another. But if you could explain something of your situation, and also thank you for stepping in as well, and Dr. Philippa Whitford for arranging this.
Hi, good morning. So my name's Alan Mitchell. I have a business called Foxglide, brand Foxglide. We're designers, manufacturers and retailers of technical sportswear. We specialise in the sport of curling. But we work with a number of international federations. We actually work with 27 countries in total. And we're also active in other sports like cycling and lawn bowling. Our brand was established in 2012. We use production facilities in both Poland and in Romania. Both these companies invested heavily in modern technology, so they're state of the art as far as our business is concerned. They've got a skill set beyond any alternatives we've sourced in the UK. Certainly in 2016, we looked extensively within the UK for a suitable supplier, and we couldn't get one to either do the quality or the products that we needed. We started, as I said, we started in 2012. From 2012 until 2020, importing from the EU was easy. We would consolidate our shipping from the factories back to the UK and then distribute back to our EU customers. About 50% of our customer base is in Europe. Sweden, Denmark, Spain, Switzerland was not an EU, but we have good deals with we had good deals with Switzerland. And we worked for a number of international federations. We had a World Championship event in Scotland last week, and 25% of the teams were wearing our uniforms. We use the domestic, or we use TNT and DHL, and we've got good, excellent rates of TNT, DHL, and one of the features of our business is the fact that we can respond, we can deliver quickly, and until January we could ship from Romania or Poland on a next day basis at pretty good costs. We've got a strong ethical outlook in our business, and working with our European partners, we know that the conditions of the factories are excellent compared to what you might know or might not know of China or Pakistan or Bangladesh. And so we know that our factories look after our staff. We can visit our factories at any time we want. But also we've benefited from buying and sourcing our own fabrics from within Europe, which has got very strong, very good reputation for excellent quality of fabrics, particularly from Italy. Since January 21, we kind of expected the customs delays. So the customs delays started with similar to the other participants here so far. Customs delays started first of all with 2 to 3 days, and then the cost started incurring with the different various Brexit admin costs added to the shipping costs. Then it was delays. Initially, the delays were 2 to 3 days, but sometimes 3 to 4 weeks. When we're trying to get almost a next day service, a 3 to 4 week delay is we've lost the customer. Probably as systems have settled down, there's obviously the COVID problem as well, which is adding to all the issues, but probably everything settled down to typically a 2 to 3 day delay, which I guess is okay. The extra admin, again, as other witnesses have said, the extra admin from shipping back to an EU supplier, where it was, you tick the box, you put the label on, and it disappeared and it went the next day. That now has gone to a 10-page manifest. So we need to know the commodity codes. We knew the commodity codes because we've shipped to Canada, we shipped to America, we shipped to Australia before. So we knew what we were doing, but having to do that all for every European order. It's admin, we're a small business, we don't have a full team of admin staff. So that automation, which we've invested in good systems, the shipping companies have invested in good systems, but shipping has gone from 15 minutes to an hour every shipment. And again, if we're doing 10 shipments a day, that's 10 hours of admin just to do the shipments. The shipping companies have increased all their costs in addition to the Brexit surcharge, which they itemise. In general, they put their costs up 5-10%, and that's kind of, it just adds to the overall customer experience. Costs are going up. We're working with efficient technology to try and reduce our cost, make our offering as best to our customers as best as possible, but we're just getting layers of extra costs and layers of extra costs. Sending orders over to our customers in the EU. Previously, as I mentioned, we did consolidated shipping, and that consolidated shipping, where we bring our order in from Romania, multiple orders from multiple customers, and then send back what we needed to our customers in Sweden, for example. We realised that's not really viable. I think actually Lee mentioned that nearly identically as well. We shipped an order typically our order is about €1,000, £1,000. We shipped an order to a customer in Sweden, and this is probably in February, March. The Swedish efficiency, which we kind of have that reputation on, they could very quickly and correctly declare that our items are excluded from the EU-UK trade deal as they were not manufactured or sufficiently enhanced, as their term, in the UK to qualify for free trade, and that's kind of under origin of goods. My customer in Sweden had to pay 12% WTO tariff, 25% Swedish VAT, and just for fun, 350 kronor, which is a £35 admin fee. And that makes sending to Sweden from the UK non-viable. Since that experience, we've tried to fight the system. Since that experience, what we've done is we've got excellent relationships with our production facilities. So we're now shipping direct from Romania to Sweden at Romanian VAT of 19%, no tariffs, no customs admin, and that gives us back a competitive advantage. But the tax is paid in Romania. The business essentially is virtually based in Romania, and we see that that is a future to our EU or European customers. We've also had great problems sourcing materials, or we've tried to source our own materials, whether that's from Italy, we work with people at YKK for zips, so they maybe manufacture in China or Japan, they import to the UK, but then we would then buy from YKK UK and try and ship that to our factories in Romania or Poland, and that is nearly impossible because, again, these goods are not UK origin. We've already paid, or YKK have already paid the tariff, which was due from China or wherever. We're then having to pay the tariff to go back to Romania. And although we could probably source these zips in Romania, we have to change our business model. Sourcing the right products in a foreign language is that little bit harder. With another example, which I feel really sorry for, and we sourced some fantastic organic cotton from a business in Wales. They had sourced that fabric from Turkey. We tried to send that to our Romanian producer. There was an 8% WTO tariff on the fabric going to Romania. And then we had to pay to translate the invoices into Romanian. And that caused the fabric to be delayed, which would normally be next day or maybe 2 days. That's gone to two week plus delay. We also previously benefited greatly from EU trade agreements. Emerging markets for the sport of curling, or not emerging markets, but the huge market for the sport of curling is Canada. We worked extensively in Switzerland, and we're trying to work more in Japan. The EU had trade deals of these three countries, and what we have found, and again it goes back to the origin of the goods, accumulation, which is a word I never really knew before January, accumulation of the EU-Canada deal has not been added into the UK-Canada deal. So our goods, although they're entirely made in the EU, do not qualify for free trade to a country like Canada, for example. Canada and Japan are a little bit harder because we don't get great logistic prices from our factories to Canada and Japan. So our route to Canada and Japan has got to come back to the UK, UK to Japan, UK to Canada, and we have to pay these WTO tariffs. Shipping to Switzerland is still roughly okay because we can ship to Switzerland direct from our facility in Romania. And again, using the Romanian business, we can ship into Switzerland tariff-free, which is
Great. Thank you very much, Alan. I would like to bring in Philip now.
Okay.
Really useful about the Fta implications of Canada.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I've actually been hit personally, the impact of tariffs on things like timber for some repairs I need to my own house. It's really quite shocking, the loss of our membership of the EU, Canada, and other trade deals. What I raised your issue in Cabinet Office questions, which is why I was late onto the to this meeting. The response was obviously that lots of support is being provided to businesses and there's all these fabulous new opportunities out there. So can you tell me, Alan, what support have you had from UK government to deal with this list of issues that you describe, particularly the tariffs hitting you at multiple stages, so tariffs on top of tariffs? And also, do you think that actually there are any new opportunities that you see coming to you because of Brexit?
So the support we had some excellent hypothetical support from Scottish Enterprise throughout the Brexit transition, but we were focused into one specialist, one particular person, consultant to Scottish Enterprise, who was excellent. I know he advises the Scottish government, he advises the UK government. So he gave some excellent hypothetical assistance. He helping with the tariffs, and the big problem was that everything until the 24th or the 17th of December, until the deal was struck, was hypothetical. So the real deal was not known, and it didn't really unravel until people looked into detail. So on the 17th of December, we assumed that accumulation would be there. On the 18th of December, once people read the text, the accumulation wasn't there. So although we were prepared as much as possible, and the advisors were prepared as possible, they didn't know what the UK government were negotiating. And these accumulation things are probably the biggest impact to our business, to take away our advantage of that previous EU benefit that we had.
I mean, that's really the key thing, isn't it? I mean, the Prime Minister kept saying that the deal meant there were no tariffs, but actually the small print is revealing to companies there are multiple tariffs. And as you describe, you've got tariffs on raw materials coming in and finished garments going out. There's literally this tariffs on top of tariffs.
Yeah, I think that, and really tariffs between 8 and 12%. Most of our garments are 12% tariff. It just takes away our advantage. We work really hard to be 12% cheaper, for example, than our competition, and all of a sudden we've just lost that overnight. And together with the other additional shipping costs, our competitive advantage has really just disappeared. We still have a great product. We still believe in our product, and probably as a small brand, you're always kind of thinking, well, we need to be cheaper than the big brands, and we're struggling to do that now. So I guess we're in a more equal playing field with our competition. The fact that we have a better product, but maybe at an equal price.
Obviously, you're reorientating some of your business to be more totally inside the EU, but do you see any opportunities? I mean, that's the response MPs constantly get, that there's all these new opportunities in the world. But
our ideal world would be to source our manufacture in the UK, but to be honest, we've looked for that for nearly 10 years and we can't find a suitable manufacturer who can do what we need to do in the UK. So that would be the great opportunity, but we've lost our skill set. So we make t-shirts, we make jackets. We can make t-shirts in the UK, no problem, but we can't make jackets. So that our business breaks there. So our business model there, and I think going forward, is to focus our European customers and let them have the advantage of our European production facility. And unfortunately, the British customers are going to have to pay the extra costs. And we need to, our solution for Canada, Switzerland, Japan, we don't have a viable solution other than to increase our costs. But okay. Bottom line is UK manufacturer would be ideal.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you very much, Alan. Right, I'm just going to turn to David. Before that, could I just let all our witnesses know, I'd be really grateful if we could close with each of you on what is the single thing that the single most useful thing that the government could do. So if you could be ready for that at the end. But if I could turn now to David of Gin Talog. Diolch yn fawr iawn. And if you could, and if you could give us an overview of your experiences.
Yeah, bore da. Well, we're Gin Talog, an organic craft distillery based on our farm in Carmarthenshire in the west of Wales. We make organic, super premium, high quality gin in really small quantities. We started the business in 2018 as part of diversification on the farm, trying to do all the right things. And to be honest, it's grown beyond our expectation. We've won many awards. We're the only Welsh gin ever to have won a 3-star Great Taste Award. And we've also won a gold International Wines and Spirits Council Award, which is an international competition. And you're up against the likes of Bacardi, Diageo, these worldwide huge brands. So, we never expected to win one of those. We won one. So everything was going nicely. We had a growing EU business because, of course, our gin has a strong Welsh identity. And the Welsh diaspora who live in Europe like to have a little bit of home. So they were ordering gin for them and their friends. Similarly, tourists who would come to Wales on holiday would find our gin, they would return back to Europe, and then they would start buying it. And gin's a very sort of competitive niche thing. People like to discover new gins, show off, show their friends a gin they've never heard of, and then the word spreads. So the business was growing nicely. We had lots of visits from distillers from Germany, Belgium, and Japan onto our farm to see what we were doing and try and learn from us. And last year, because the European section of the business had grown, we changed our logistics partner to UPS because they were much more adept at effecting international deliveries, even though they were more expensive. So we went through all the IT change and all the hassle of changing our logistics partner purely to facilitate growing our European business. And of course, then Brexit happened. So it's essentially killed off our business. It's made our product uncompetitive for European consumers. We only sell to end users. We don't sell to wholesalers or supermarkets. Our business is small, and we focus upon that relationship and that intimacy with our customer, which means that we only sell to people who are buying our gin. It's basically killed off the market. I can give you some real life examples. Okay, our first shipment we were told last year, get ready for Brexit, get ready for Brexit. What kind of Brexit? We've spent the whole year, going through all of these HMRC bulletins and drinks cluster for Wales, Zoom meetings and everything. We didn't know what kind of Brexit it was going to be. So first order we had in January was for a customer in Ireland. Now, from where we live in Carmarthenshire, we can almost see Ireland. It's so close. And actually, we're part of a joint Welsh and European project called Celtic Roots that are seeking to unite businesses in Ireland with businesses in the west of Wales. And that's been a fantastic project. That's now been killed stone dead because of tariffs and barriers. So we had an order for Ireland last year, in January. This order crossed the Irish Sea 5 times because this was the beginning of Brexit, and even a carrier like UPS was unsure about the paperwork for alcohol. Eventually, the customer accepted the delivery for 1 bottle of gin and had to pay €38 duty and costs, which is almost 100% of the cost of the order. That's example number 1. Example number 2, we had an order for a customer in Belgium a while back. They paid £47 for the gin and the shipping. And when they received the bottle in Belgium, they were charged an extra €31.67. Now, you can imagine from the customer's perspective that's, who's going to pay that? And in fact, they were minded to refuse the delivery, but they accepted the delivery because they felt sorry for us. Pity is not a good platform for a business. It's absolutely ridiculous. I'll give you a third example. For some reason, we had a really strong growing market in the Netherlands. I mean, selling gin to the Dutch who invented the stuff, we were kind of quite proud of that. A customer placed an order just last week to the value of £440. When we did the investigation into the order and what it would need, we had to tell the customer they would pay €92.61 Dutch VAT plus additional costs imposed by the carrier. So of course the customer cancelled the order. So we're in the bizarre situation now where when we get an order from Europe, we are morally obliged to inform the customer of what they're going to have to pay extra. And of course they cancel. So we're dissuading people from buying our product. So this has absolutely killed off any of our European customers, and it's made our products completely uncompetitive. These are real life examples. These aren't just theoretical things. These are things that have happened to us in the last few months. Now you might say, well, what about all these wonderful new markets that you could take advantage of? Well, we were already shipping to these new markets. These are existing markets for us. And now the EU has the same regime as these markets. So complications with logistics carriers, extra costs for logistics, imposition of duty and tariff upon receipt. So for example, when we used to send gin to Australia, to Welsh people living in Australia, they would be stung with at least a 40 Aussie dollar charge on receipt. But even then, half the bottles didn't get through because it seemed to depend upon how the customs agent was feeling that particular day. So half of the bottles would be destroyed on receipt at Sydney Airport, and some of them would get through. There was no way of knowing. And of course, this makes us as a business look completely unreliable. What about America? Well, of course, we've sent gin to America as well. But America, well, countries generally have a very interesting approach to alcohol. So there are some countries where we can't send it at all. But even in America, individual states have individual rules. So for example, you can't send a bottle of gin to California to an end user. It's just not allowed. So we have to obviously understand that. Canada, the same thing. Certain provinces have certain rules because the state has a monopoly on the sale of alcohol. Scandinavia, often it's the same thing. So all of these, low-hanging fruit, new opportunities that we're supposed to be taking up, that they're simply not there. And actually, even worse, we've now inserted this complexity to Europe, which is our closest market. And of course, there's the whole proximity factor. Sending a bottle of gin to Dusseldorf was as easy as sending it to Doncaster. Now it's just a non-starter. It's just not going to happen. On the other side, all of the cost of our inputs have increased as well. We import various consumables for our product from France, Austria, and Italy. So we've had to retain the services of an import agent to facilitate some of those payments. They take a cut on every shipment that we bring in. So whatever we import, we have to pay £55 to them plus VAT, 2.5% for each shipment. We also have to pay the VAT to the customs agent before we receive the shipment and then try and claim that back from the UK government. It's just a whole load of complexity that for a craft business on a farm, it's just completely untenable. We just can't do it. And you can imagine in some ways it's the perfect storm. Market being killed off, costs increasing at the same time. And we can't really pass those costs on to our customers because we're already at a high price point. And if we look at the economic uncertainty post-pandemic and post-Brexit, we just don't think that we can do that. One other issue we have, of course, is we're organic and we're certified by the Welsh Organic Scheme. Now, until now, that's been part of the EU-wide organic scheme, and there's been a reciprocity in that arrangement. We now have no idea whether that's going to carry on or not, and whether our organic status is actually valid now for certain countries overseas. So that's another completely grey area for us.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, David. I mean, I think you explained a lot of things with great clarity. Thank you very much indeed. As I just said, if I could start with you, is just look at it. What is the single thing that the UK government and perhaps Welsh government, if we just allow the situation that you find yourself in as well, what would make a material difference to you in the here and now?
I know it's a pipe dream, but being part of the single market or customs union, facilitating perhaps transactions for small businesses that don't have the complexity that some other businesses would have. And I've got to say the Welsh government has been really absent on this whole debate. They've done nothing to protect Welsh businesses at all, and they just sort of waved it through heb siw na miw, as we say in Wales, without a peep.
Yeah, without a peep. Exactly. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn, David. Okay, if I could just go back through everybody as well on exactly the same question, what we should be taking away, the single thing we should be taking away as an ask. Kenneth McCartney, from you, please.
Yeah, from me, I would say the biggest thing to be done at the moment is to lift the smokescreen of COVID and vaccinations and start listening to businesses here what's happening before it's too late. And the second thing would be to help the forwarders to align with customs in Europe, the European states. That's extremely important. That would smooth a lot of things, I think.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for your evidence. Lyle Piper, please forgive me.
I think I've repeated this a number of times, so here we go again. Just simply take the international trading terms out of the Irish Sea, make it unfettered access, use the tools that already existed within the EU GB model, and let us get on with our business in terms of those who want to trade in Europe, and we do so with the international trading terms down the middle of our business, full stop. Simplification.
Lovely, thank you, Lyle. And Lee Jones.
I think what's needed is a trade minister or some central government department that only looks after SMEs. So it brings across that they're able to deal with all the different departments of the government, and they're able to work together to try to to solve the problems, because there's not one single department that works specifically for SMEs that you can get the right advice from. So there's a whole range of solutions to try and fix the problem, but you need to bring it together with a central department or trade minister for SMEs first.
Yeah, for responsibilities. Lovely. Okay, and Alan Mitchell?
Johnny EU, but short of that, accumulation of the previous deals would be maybe tangible, realistic, and proper free trade with other European countries, which is kind of what we were promised and not delivered, would be ideal.
Okay, lovely. Well, thank you very much indeed to all of you, all of the 5 witnesses. Striking evidence. I would welcome you now, if you're entirely more than welcome to stay for the next session with the trade body representatives. I do appreciate you're busy, but very, very grateful. I think personally I found it really useful to hear from people who are directly affected by this, and not just the interpretation. And they are striking stories, and I think it is our duty to get these stories out, how this really affects people. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Because we're on now to the second session. Right, let me find my share piece of paper. Okay, so we've now got who we've got with us now is the panel of trade body representatives. Let me be correct and careful on who I call. So we've got, this session runs from 11 to 12. James Sibley, Head of International Affairs at the Federation of Small Businesses. Suren Thiru, Head of Economics at the British Chambers of Commerce. And Russell Antrim, Head of EU Negotiations at the Confederation of British Industry, CBI. Okay. Lovely to welcome you all here now. We're going back into our conventional format where there'll be a lead questioner from among the commissioners, and you'll be asking questions of you, which I imagine you've received beforehand, and anything that we can pick up. But I think what's struck me, and I'm sure has struck everybody else as well, there was some common ground. Obviously there were some points of the stories that were really typical. And I think if you could give us an overview, if you could pick out what you've heard this morning, and also from what you know from your own contacts and your own members, the degree to which small and medium-sized enterprises are being, suffering, for want of a better word. What is their experience in general? If you could give us some explanation. If I could start, or Russell, if I could start with you.
Russian roulette. Hi everyone, thanks for inviting me on this morning. Yes, those conversations are very familiar to me and my team. We've had hundreds of conversations with our members, large and small, since the first day, and I think actually your panelists did a pretty cracking job at painting a pretty stark picture there. Short of time to prepare over Christmas. And in the middle of a global pandemic, businesses implementing the new agreement have found it a rocky first 6 months. I think the scale of the challenge varies, and it's not just in relation to size, but also to the sector in which the business is operating in, but also the structure of the business's supply chain. So on the first, some sectors have been more impacted than others. So manufacturers, goods traders and hauliers have had the steepest hill to climb, with very kind of little time and I suppose little previous knowledge of new customs and border rules. So our most recent CBI survey showed that 2/3, 68%, over 2/3, 68% of manufacturers and distributors had reported delays at the border and additional customs costs. Second, on the supply chain, and I think this was borne out by the evidence you've just heard. New rules in the TCA on origin and preferential access means established supply chains are now subject to tariffs, which pushes up costs and adds complexity. In the UK, the lack of bilateral accumulation, this word we've now become kind of accustomed to, means that many firms who import components from the rest of the world realise they're not going to be able to meet those thresholds to be exported or imported tariff-free between the UK and the EU. And while it's hard to kind of price in, I think, the impact of rules of origin, it is, as you've heard, and probably will inevitably lead to adjustments in supply chain. So, as Kenneth and Lee outlined earlier, and for example, I mean, this has hit firms who operated as a UK logistics hub, particularly those moving goods to the Republic of Ireland. And I mean, anecdotally, we've heard many businesses choosing to leave Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland markets altogether, which has obviously been borne out in the ONS data that was published yesterday. And then finally, pertinent to today's discussion is obviously size. And undoubtedly, larger firms have experienced similar problems as their smaller counterparts, but their size provides them with the resources, I suppose, to navigate and understand those challenges a little bit more quickly. Smaller firms, I mean, again, we've heard it, faced with the dual impact of COVID-19 and lockdowns, have had an immense challenge to understand the changes in the TCA and what it means for their businesses to stick in the necessary resources to navigate it. I mean, small businesses often with smaller cash reserves for the first time facing these new complex procedures and rules. It's very difficult, and larger firms are also more likely to have greater institutional knowledge where they've kind of dealt with these issues before. Okay. And then finally, I think.
Give me a second. I have to go to another panelist.
No, that's fine. Sorry.
I'm sure you'll have plenty of time to say more. If I could
Absolutely.
turn Suren through, if you could just summarise for us as well.
Thank you. I mean, what we heard from the earlier panelists was absolutely what we hear across the chamber network across the UK. It's very much a broad-based issue, and the thing we get back is that UK SMEs in particular continue to face real disruption difficulties, and a lot of the problems they're facing go beyond mere teething problems. If we could just summarise briefly in terms of it's three broad areas where issues are being reported. The first sort of issue is around the guidance provided. Now, often at the moment, there's a bit of a conflation between guidance and advice. So a lot of the guidance about that, what rules have changed, around rules of origin, that sort of thing. But then it's left to the businesses to try and interpret what that means for their business, and so the fiscal impact potentially of getting it wrong falls on that particular business. And that's creating huge issues. And the two big issues that we raise in particular in this area is rules of origin and VAT, which again are two big areas that a lot of businesses are struggling with. The second area is how the new TCA is being implemented across the EU. We're hearing of different implementations in different countries around different types of checks and different implementation of rules. That again is creating a lot of issues for our members. The third area is more structural, so issues to do with the deal itself. So rules of origin was mentioned earlier, and the lack of data accumulation, but the lack of mutual recognition of conformity assessments is creating a huge issue at the moment. And also, one thing also to bear in mind is that with the services sector, we're not seeing the biggest impact at the moment because of the impact of COVID. So, for example, lack of mutual recognition of professional qualifications is a huge non-tariff barrier, and that's going to create huge issues and become more of a live issue, I think, as we move past the pandemic. And Ross is absolutely right with it's not just the Brexit impact. SMEs are starting at a weak point because of the impact of COVID on business cash flow and revenue. That's had a huge impact. So the costs associated with some of the frictions we're seeing at the moment on the border is actually been exacerbated by what we've seen in the past year and the impact on COVID on small business finances.
Lovely. Okay, thank you, Suren. And James, please.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. So yes, what we heard in the first panel does tally with what we're seeing completely. So to give some data, we did a survey at the end of March, looking at the impact of the first 3 months of the TCA, and the figures we saw were pretty stark. So I mean, the headline was that about a quarter of our SME exporters had stopped exporting to the EU since the 1st of January. Majority of those in their view was temporary, but there was a significant number who said they'd stop permanently. Now, if you dig into that, it's a host of issues, which I'll go into in a second. But the other thing that tallies with what we're seeing relates to the disruption. So Russell also, I think the CBI is seeing similar. We had about 70% of our exporters and importers seeing delays. And the worrying thing there was that of that 70%, a third, they were seeing delays of over 2 weeks. which is significant, and that results in issues with your reputation with your customers. That's resulting in lost customers. It's a significant issue. The other thing, rules of origin has been mentioned in the first panel and already in the second one. We knew it was going to be a big issue, and it's proving so. So we had a survey in December 2020 where we found that just over half of our exporters of goods had no experience of dealing with rules of origin. So we not only had, last minute information on what the rules of origin in the TCA were, but we also were really starting from a standing position, really, when it came to rules of origin. When you dig into the issues that SMEs are experiencing, and why that 25% have stopped, a lot of it is to do with trying to figure out exactly what the new rules are. Do my products meet rules of origin? How do I make use of the preference? Can I? With VAT, depending on your Incoterms used, do I need to register in X number of member states in order to fulfill DPD orders? And how do I do that? Do different member states require the appointment of a fiscal representative? There's a lot for SMEs to go through. And we're seeing, exactly the kind of issues that we heard from in the first panel. I think we're going to talk about sectors later on, so I'll leave that to then.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, for the sort of broad overview, and we'll be able to go into it. Forgive me for behaving like a chair. If you could try and keep our answers fairly brief, we'll get through more. But if there's something that you really feel strong that you need to say and you haven't had a chance, I'll make sure that we get that at the end. Right, Hilary, sorry, over to you now, please.
Thank you very much, Liz. Look, we've just heard very powerful testimony from businesses about the difficulties they're now having to cope with. And you've all said this doesn't come as a surprise to you because you're hearing these stories every day. When you talk to government, do they get it? Perhaps I could start with you, James.
So the answer is that government does listen. So FSB and others, we sit on the Brexit Business Task Force that meets weekly. Up until recently, that was chaired by the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Now it's chaired by Lord Frost. The answer is that they do listen. We've been raising these issues on a weekly basis going back before the start of this year. In terms of action, though, you are in a pretty tricky position where you've got to try and find the sweet spot where the solution is something government is willing to do, something that the EU has not already rejected, and something that will make a difference. And it's difficult. One thing that the government has done that we campaigned for a long time was the introduction of the SME Brexit Support Fund that came in March. That is useful. We would have preferred to have seen it brought in before the move out of the transition period, but we're glad it's in place. And that exists to provide SMEs with grants for support, consultancy support and training to adapt to the new rules. So we're happy that is in place, and that's an example of the government listening to us. Right. But it's a challenge.
Now, you suggested that there were some things, if I read you right, that could be done which the government isn't prepared to do. Is that a fair interpretation?
I mean, we're all familiar with the government's priorities in terms of regulatory autonomy. So, I mean, things that we've asked for instance, in the past on SPS, for instance, where there could be solutions that have not, the government is not willing. We've heard in recent times about, the idea of a Swiss-style arrangement on SPS. I don't think that's something the government would be willing to consider.
So the government puts the regulatory autonomy, as you describe it, above the interests of the businesses that we've heard from this morning and those who talk to you. They give that a higher priority because making a change like that would be required to ease some of the problems we've just heard about.
I mean, yes, I think that is.
Yeah, okay, fine. Thanks very much indeed. Suren.
Yeah, so I think James is right. The government are listening. So we also sit on the Business Brexit Task Force. And there are some good elements like James mentioned, the SME fund, also the later import checks was really important to not exacerbate the current situation. But I still think, both from the UK and also the EU side, there's still a lack of political will to make changes that are necessary. So we're still in the sort of political aspects of Brexit as opposed to the practicalities. And we think there are a number of things that both sides need to get back around the table to do. But that may be something for the technical committees that get set up as part of the deal. So things like on greater customs facilitation or looking around sort of ways of more likely touch SPS regime and rules of origin, that sort of thing.
Now, I mean, at the moment, of course, the UK is not applying checks on goods inward because it's put it off at least twice. Do you think when the government finally gets round to doing that, that is going to add to the pressure on the UK and indeed the EU to realise we need to do something about the problems that our businesses on both sides of the channel are facing?
I mean, to be frank, we hope they look at it earlier than that. So I think it's something that, some of these issues can be looked at quite early, but I think it would depend on, I guess, what point we are when those checks come in. Have businesses been able to make those necessary adjustments to their supply chains to maybe mitigate some of those challenges? But I mean, our view remains that, the deal is good starting points, of course, but there's a lot more to do, and both the UK and the EU need to get back around the table to deal with some of the practical issues of Brexit.
Now, you referred to, I think you said this goes beyond teething trouble, and ministers have been quoted as saying, well, there have been some initial difficulties, but these are largely being resolved. That's not what we've heard this morning. Roughly what percentage of the problems that are being brought to you and that we've heard about today are definitely not teething problems because they are the result of the deal that has been done?
Yeah, so there certainly are some teething problems. So businesses filling in the wrong paperwork and that sort of thing. But in terms of the balance, I think more of it is on the sort of long-term structural issues with the deal.
Yeah.
So there's sort of issues that mean that exporting to the EU may not be viable for some businesses longer term. So one example of this would be the lack of data accumulation for businesses, where this means that it would cost, you have to absorb that cost that tariff cost to export to the EU, or becomes non-viable to do so. They pull out the market and maybe look elsewhere if they can't adjust their supply chain. So a lot of it, I think, the majority of what we're hearing is sort of structural issues with the deal itself.
Okay, thanks. Russell.
Yeah, I mean, I'll make it a hat trick of business organisations sitting on the business Brexit task force. And actually, it's not just the business organisations that sit on there. There are also kind of a rolling cast members of businesses, both large and small as well. So the government are hearing that, absolutely. And again, that has borne fruit that James and Suren have outlined. I think on the SME fund, I think we would probably like it to be widened a little bit, because at the moment it does exclude any businesses that are also exporting to the rest of the world. So it's EU only focused, which I think narrows the scope a little bit. And again, just to add to that, the kind of the gains from that, the government have recently started producing guidance on EU member state by member state guidance on services provision. So actually digging into the deal a little bit more, which is going to be really helpful for SMEs, obviously, once mobility starts again, when travel restrictions are lifted. So I think the government are listening, and we have been engaging in, but as Suren and James have already outlined, obviously, you do run into those more structural problems, which sometimes limits how much the government can act.
And unless those structural problems are addressed, then the difficulties we've heard about today will continue to affect SMEs.
Well, I think Suren was completely right when he said we're still in a bit of a political sphere at the moment. So I think the hope is, I think there's a realism that the governance structures, they're going to be looking at implementing the deal. But I think it's hope that kind of forum and that increased dialogue between the both sides will be able to, push away the politics a little bit more and focus on the practicalities.
Thank you very much indeed.
Lovely.
Thanks,
thank
Liz.
you very much. Thank you, Hilary. Thank you. Okay, Professor Alan Winters on question 3, please.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. You've more or less answered the principal question I was going to ask you, which is whether the TCA, the leaving the single market and having this free trade agreement impinges more heavily on SMEs. I think you've all three in your introductory remarks really made that point. If I'm wrong, you'd better correct me. But perhaps I can sort of ask a couple of supplementary questions. I mean, one is that the TCA has got an SME chapter, a title indeed. Whether anything in there is of particular use, even in the future rather than now. And secondly, if in addition to that, are there other things which the government can do in a sense to level the playing field between SMEs and large firms? In other words, are there bits of the TCA that are impinging proportionately much more heavily on SMEs? So let me start with Suram, since he hasn't gone first before. So Suram, why don't you start?
Thanks, Alan. In terms of the SME chapter, I mean, we've not really heard any feedback from members on that specifically, but I guess the sense is that because SMEs are struggling more generally, I think there's a sense that it's not actually working as well as it could do at the moment, albeit it is still early days and there's a bit of a fog around initial arrangements. In terms of levelling the playing field, I think James mentioned earlier the SME support fund. I think it's something like that is going to play a critical role, because I mentioned in my opening remarks, one of the key issues for SMEs in particular is the gap between guidance and actual advice, and that's where the fund can play a key role in that space. But it probably needs to be widened, as Russell mentioned, but also increased as well, because it's probably not big enough in size, given the gap in advice that many SMEs face. I think the other area as well, because a lot of businesses, SMEs in particular, are on that sort of tipping point between whether it's viable to export to the EU or not. So looking at whether there are ways of reducing some of the frictions. So, things like mutual recognition of quantity assessments, that could play an important role in smoothing the path for SMEs in particular. And looking at if the focus on those sort of measures to try and ease the flow of trade, I think will help SMEs in particular, whereas large businesses in the main can maybe absorb some of those increased costs.
Thanks. Russell.
Yeah, like Suran, so we haven't had a huge amount of feedback on the SME chapter, particularly. So I might defer to James, who perhaps has. He's nodding, so hopefully that's a yes. On how it can be. So obviously we've covered the fact that there are structural issues in the TCA that are going to take a little bit, for the foreseeable future are going to be with us. I suppose one thing that can help, and that's, I suppose, exacerbating the situation for SMEs particularly, are the disparities between EU member states' customs authorities, for example. And I think this is something where we're really hoping that the government structures can kick in and actually fully implement the deal. So, I mean, inconsistent approaches from member states on customs forms, conducting checks. I mean, we've heard stories where, for example, acceptance of an export health certificate is dependent on what vet is on shift. So one vet at this specific port will sign them off, another one won't. We've heard stories about different coloured pens being rejected, as kind of pedantic as that. So I think the hope is, and I think one of the previous panelists talked about lifting a bit of a fog. I think actually fully implementing the deal and getting rid of some of these inconsistencies will help SMEs particularly, especially when they obviously have lower cash reserves and fewer resources.
Thank you very much. James, anything to add?
Thank you. So FSB strongly argued for the inclusion of an SME chapter in the TCA. And the reason that we did is that we find historically SMEs have not used preference available to them under FTAs. We know that from EU deals that were in place while the UK was a member. The reasons for that are numerous, but one of them is access to information and readily understandable information. So we were glad to see an SME chapter included. And we think the government could be doing a better job of implementing it. So one of the things the SME chapter does is calls for an SME portal where you can access information to understand the deal. And at the moment, that hasn't really been set up. This goes back to something that I think Lee mentioned in the wrapping up of the first panel, but if you could have a single entry point for an SME looking to understand trade with Europe, understand the TCA, that would be incredibly helpful. And we think the SME chapter provides a reason to set this up. The EU has something very similar called access to markets, and they have various SME help desks, such as the intellectual property help desk for trade. At the moment, if you're an SME going on gov.uk, you're presented with the same information that you would be presented with if you were a large company, spread across multiple departments, whether it's HMRC, BAYS, or DIT. It would be useful if we could have a single portal where you can move in as an SME and try and understand what you have to do and understand the guidance that's in front of you.
Thank you very much. I guess I need to leave it there since we're pushing for time, but thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And okay, question 4 is in 2 parts. Paul, you're asking the first, please, yeah?
Thank you very much indeed, Chair, and thank the panel for their answers thus far. But I'm really wanting to focus in on the SMEs that are probably, what we should put it, being denied the opportunity to engage in business opportunities for them because of the bureaucracy that has been imposed upon them by what is not necessarily the right deal. And what help can your organisations give to those small SMEs to ensure that they will take up the benefit of having deals? And I'm thinking of the Northern Ireland Protocol in particular, where we have many businesses in Northern Ireland who cannot get small orders sent across from the United Kingdom because of the additional bureaucracy that is required. As a consequence, they're having to overstock. This is putting financial constraints upon them, cash flow and everything else, burden ordering larger quantities to basically reduce the cost of the items that are coming to them because of the costs imposed by Europe in the process. What help can your organisations give to these small SMEs?
Shall I start? I think it's my turn to go first.
Yes, Russell.
I'll jump in. So I it's not exhaustive, but I think there's probably three key ways the CBI can help. So firstly, and the other guys I'm sure will be on the same, we facilitate kind of an information flow between government and businesses, particularly SMEs, who lack the resources or big public affairs teams that obviously allow them to engage on a regular basis with politicians and government ministers. So we take in a huge amount of anecdotal and evidence from our members and feed that directly into top levels of government through various ways, including the BBT. Actually, on Northern Ireland specifically, we did call on the BBT for a Northern Ireland Business Brexit Task Force. That's why I'm calling it BBT. It's a bit of a tongue twister, and that has been set up as well. So there is that direct link between Northern Ireland businesses and the Cabinet Office and the Northern Ireland Office as well. So that has been set up. Secondly, we provide practical guidance that kind of complements the government's own. We do that in discussions with businesses and for businesses. So we try to make it a little bit more practical and share best practice from what other members are doing, so members can benefit from that. And then finally, I think we can leverage our network. So, the CBI is the only business organisation in the UK that's a member of Business Europe. We talk regularly to our sister federations, and that allows us to kind of get a consistent message from European businesses on what needs to change. So, for example, we've recently jointly supported an EU data adequacy agreement and wrote to the Commission and the Council following the European Parliament's vote last week. So there's 3 ways that we can help.
So there's a few areas, in addition to what Russell's mentioned. Local chambers of commerce already play a sort of key role in the international trade process, providing trade export documentation, and employ international trade advisors and trade facilitation experts as well. So previously they were working with the rest of the world. Now they're working to help businesses trade within Europe. We've also set up another business called Chamber Customs, which is a customs brokering advisory service, which is delivered through Chambers of Commerce across the UK. And that again is helping businesses cut through and again sort of filling that advice gap that I mentioned earlier. And the last area we're helping with is a series of webinars covering a whole range of Brexit hot topics like rules of origin, DAT. I think even Alan Winters appeared on one of our early webinars, and that's been helping our members again, sort of breaking down sort of the 1,000 feet view of a UK trade deal on the ground impact. which has been really vital for a lot of our members.
And thank you. I think the services that FSB offer and the help that we offer is going to be similar to BCC and CBI. I mean, by right of membership, as an FSB member, you have access to our legal helpline and also advice on tax, for instance. We also have been trying to focus on providing the information our members need. So we also have been doing a series of webinars. As the others do, we have a transition hub where we try and distill the information into accessible language for our membership. And then finally, we are a representative organisation, so our members come to us with issues and we can represent them either to government or even to other businesses if they've encountered issues with their supply chains. So there's a lot that's been going on over the past 5 months.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. Could I just pick up on a couple of things that's just been touched upon? And I'll nail my colours firmly to a mast. I work inside what's termed a larger business. And one of the things we've done over the last couple of years is to actually take a systems solution to some of these challenges and questions. And the idea being that you work down the value chain with your customers, with your suppliers, to try and make information cascade. I wonder, with the organizations represented, has there been any more creative thought made to try and make larger businesses stand up and take responsibility for those around them? Has there been any consideration made to that? Søren, maybe you'd like to have a swing at that one first.
Sure. I'm not aware of anything formally. We've heard anecdotally around some supply chains, those at the top of the supply chain, helping with the flow of information and giving a bit more time for businesses to adjust in terms of things like payments and that sort of thing. But I'll go back to my earlier point. What I guess SMEs are really keen on in terms of what systems they do need is around getting expert advice, getting experts in, and whether that's provided by large businesses or elsewhere. I think that's going to be the crucial. That's going to be the key to help SMEs.
Russell?
Well, Jeff, I know firsthand the work that the BASF have been doing. I've discussed it with you and how you're helping further down your supply chain. I mean, we've heard other examples. So some of the big online retail platforms, some of the big tech ones have begun or are in the process of rolling out various online resources and live events for their for the businesses that use their services. Many of the banks, so a lot of the banks, Barclays, for example, where I sat on panels, have also rolled out similar schemes to their customers. And as I said, many issues faced by smaller firms also being faced by the larger firms. So yeah, there is that kind of information sharing and best practice that's being pushed down. And as Søren said, some larger firms are also taking a more flexible approach to their value chain. So whether that's providing advanced payments or giving them more time on orders, that stuff is pretty commonplace in manufacturing sectors particularly.
James, we're all in this together. Any suggestions?
Yeah, so one of the bits of guidance that we've been saying to our membership for a long time now is that the best way of dealing with the changes is talking to your customers, talking to your suppliers, talking to everyone in your supply chain. And that is a two-way process. We've seen good and bad examples of that in practice. Russell mentioned some of the large online platforms who I think are doing quite a great deal working with their small sellers and business users in terms of communicating what needs to be done. We've also had some examples of 20+ page Brexit supply chain risk assessments landing on the desk of SMEs, which has not been so useful, but that's by the by. I think one group of large firms that could be really doing a lot more is couriers. We heard in the first panel issues with couriers. SMEs disproportionately rely on couriers and fast parcel operators. Now it's a mixed bag in terms of the performance of individual couriers. Some are better than others. But I think in terms of the data they provide and the communication they provide on issues in the logistical supply chain could improve. And that would be a massive help to SMEs. So that's the one thing I'd say.
Thanks very much, James. I'll step away from any particular logistics comments from my perspective as well, by the way. Back to you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Okay, Caroline Lucas, over to you now with your question.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yes, just two questions. The first was that we heard in the first session from witnesses from all 4 nations expressing problems that they were experiencing, but it would be really helpful to know if there's any greater kind of disaggregation of impact of the new trade barriers, particularly by sector or by region. So I wondered if James, you might start off on that, just to say if there's any area that feels disproportionately affected by sector or region.
So by region, the data that we've seen is actually quite uniform in terms of impact. So I can focus on sectors. One sector that's been hit particularly hard is retail and wholesale. We've heard from the impact of the rules of origin changes for businesses that warehouse in the UK and then distribute to UK and EU customers. It's a massive change, and it's probably going to result in some massively realigned supply chains. So that's a significant issue. We've also seen the statistics on agri-food exports. The SBS requirements that are now in place for many SMEs are massive and costly. So we've seen from the data in terms of agri-food exports, it's been a massive impact. The other is in manufacturing. We've heard about accumulation. Diagonal accumulation is something we argued for very, very strongly during the negotiations. That's not in place, and for some manufacturers that is a big issue. We're not a producer nation. We focus on value-added manufacturing, and for a lot of inputs, it's a major challenge. So I say those are the 3 that I would highlight from our perspective.
Thank you, that's really helpful. I'm not sure, Ciaran, if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'd agree with James in terms of the broad-based regional impact. I think our data show that pretty clearly. I mean, it's slightly higher for sort of Northern Wales, but I think that's largely due to the sectoral sort of impacts there. Those sectors which rely on a quite complex supply chains like manufacturing, those types of businesses that rely on just-in-time delivery. Again, those are sort of the trends that are driving what we're seeing at the moment in terms of any sort of sectoral trends. I would also add that we're not really seeing a full picture at the moment, in that a lot of issues we're seeing at the moment are on the goods side, people making stuff, but because of the impact of COVID, as I mentioned earlier, on the services sector, restricting movement, that sort of thing, that's we'd like to see the full impact later on this year, which may see a more broader base of sector impact.
Lovely, thank you. Finally, Russell.
And yeah, no, I'd add that, Ciaran. I think, agree with both what James and Ciaran said. I think on services, that is something actually, we're expecting when borders relax, and we already are. So, for instance, we're seeing those in the manufacturing sector who are trying to perform aftercare services, so sending engineers to the EU. And for example, we've heard one firm where it's taking 8 weeks to get an engineer into Germany to go and carry out a test. If that continues, that's going to make those business models very difficult to sustain. And it's not just in manufacturing and those aftercare services, it's also in a whole range of professional business services. So we've had some consultancies where they need to obviously move consultants between EU member states quite quickly and for long or short periods of time. And I think the delay in visa applications is going to be one of those problems that we're going to see tick up over the summer. Yeah.
Thanks. Actually, Russell, that leads me on to my second question, because you talk about viability of business models, and we heard again in the first session that a number of businesses talked of relocating to the EU because their business model is no longer viable. And I just wondered if you had any reflections on what the implications are of that in terms of job losses in the UK, in terms of the fact that tax will be being paid in the EU rather than here, and just how compatible that is with a government levelling up agenda.
So I think it's too early to say. I think, it's still 6 months in. As I said, I think we're getting to that point now where, the teething issues, or what were called the teething issues, we kind of know those, and now we're moving into those more structural issues. So let's see. I think on the levelling up agenda, so, we've got the TCA. I think what a lot of our members are now looking for from the government is, okay, you've struck this TCA, what next? What are you going to try and do with it? Obviously, there are opportunities there. For the first time in 40 years, the UK has control over trade, immigration, investment policy. And I think what our members are looking for is, what is the government going to do with those newfound freedoms? And I think particularly when it comes to levelling up, how is that going to, how's that going to benefit trade? But also, I mean, that's not the only, trade isn't the only lever, obviously, that the government has when it comes to levelling up. So there's a whole, whether it's boosting regeneration funding, UK Share Prosperity Fund, levelling up funds, supporting clusters. There's a whole arsenal of things the government can pull to make sure that every region actually benefits from trade, and to meet that levelling up agenda.
Thanks. Can I just see if Suren or James had any further reflections just on that levelling up aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Russell, that it's too early to see the overall trend, but I guess one area we are seeing in a more broader area and levelling up is around access to labour. And we are seeing emerging, actually part of this is due to COVID, of course, but we are seeing skill shortages in some areas and some sectors and some parts of the country. And there remains to see whether that's a temporary trend or a permanent trend, and depending on what happens when furlough ends and maybe more people have to move around. But that's clearly a concern. Russell also mentioned some of the funding issues as well post-Brexit. So the UK Share Prosperity Fund is crucial for local business support programs across the UK. And still there's a lack of clarity of what is going to happen to that, which is creating potential cliff edges in some really important local support schemes as well. And in terms of opportunities around levelling up, I mean, we're quite interested in what will happen to the subsidy regime and how that can support sort of levelling up across the UK as well.
Thank you. And I know we're running out of time, but James, any just final reflections from you?
So one reflection would be, and this again falls into the camp of where it's too early to tell, but the free port programme, which is a big part of the government's levelling up agenda, it will be interesting to see how much that benefits SMEs. One of the questions that we're asking everyone involved in that programme is, how can SMEs access the free port programme? How can they set up in a free port? What are the administrative hurdles that they're going to have to jump through going to be like? Because free ports could help overcome some of the challenges that we're seeing, but they need to work for SMEs.
Thanks very much. Back to you, Chair.
Lovely, thank you very much. And also, I'm really glad to see that Claire Hanna, MP, can join us. Claire, it's your question now.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to all of the witnesses. Apologies that I had to drop out in parts, but really interesting to hear about the specific kind of by region and by sector challenges, and I suppose the overview you're able to give. We heard in the earlier session from Mr. Martin, who trades in the northwest of Northern Ireland, and the challenges he's facing in the east-west part of his businesses, and some of the solutions that might be available to help to ease that. So absolutely not seeking to minimize that, but are there opportunities? I suppose I'm coming from a position where here in Northern Ireland, we've sort of been handed lemons, and some of us are trying to make lemonade. And I want to talk about the dual access that businesses here potentially have at the hinge of the UK single market and the EU single market, and the fact that we can trade into both. Are there opportunities that you would see for businesses here, and is that access that your members in Britain would seek to have? And I'll maybe just Russell, would you have a view on that?
Absolutely. So yeah, I think the protocol does offer a clear opportunity as a kind of gateway between two markets. I mean, for instance, I don't know, a Northern Ireland life sciences firm, for example, can only move goods barrier-free into Europe and GB, although obviously there are some, but they can also batch test and QP release for both markets as well. So there is a USP in that. And I think the exam question for Northern Ireland, I suppose, is how do you turn the protocol into additional jobs and more prosperity? And I think getting the implementation right is absolutely priority number one for our members in Northern Ireland, but also GB members exporting into Northern Ireland. On whether it could be useful for the rest of GB, I mean, I understand the question. I don't know. I suppose if then the UK had that dual access, Northern Ireland would lose it. So, but I suppose it's not something that's been raised. I think what I said previously is where our members are is looking forwards. And I think, as I said, we now kind of know what the structural issues are in the TCA. It's now about how is the government going to use these newfound freedoms to help firms and to boost trade. And I think that's where we are as members, not necessarily looking at, could we go for a Northern Ireland model for the rest of the GB, etc.
I appreciate that. Essentially, it's what we had pre-Brexit. I understand. I suppose I'm just trying to make the comparison in that, notwithstanding the current challenges to East-West trade, that it is an opportunity. Would there be a view on that from the Chamber of Commerce as well?
I think Ross is right on the first point, certainly that there is opportunities for businesses in Northern Ireland. We speak Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce, and there's clearly opportunities there. I mean, in terms of GB to NI, I mean, obviously, again, would be similar. I think a lot of businesses are practical. They see where we are now and looking to improve based on the current structure, really. So a lot of it's looking at long-term improvements to the flow of trade. So looking at greater customs facilitation, mutual recognition of conformity assessments. That's going to be really important with the flow of trade from GB to NI, and then looking at other ways, sort of harmonising paperwork, for example. Those sort of things, I think, are things that our members are raising at the moment, sort of practical level ways of improving what the existing framework.
And apologies, by the way, I talked about Lyle Martin, and it's not, it's Lyle Piper, and apologies for that. Just from the FSB, have you engaged with members in Northern Ireland, and are they able to see those opportunities? And are there things, and I appreciate those points about making the rules work, and also about stability, because we know that's a key ingredient in terms of attracting investment. And we know from decades in this place, investors don't want to invest in a basket case. But from the FSB's perspective, is that something you've been able to hear from members or engage with them on?
So yes, thank you. So yes, we have been engaging with members on this, and FSB Northern Ireland, our Belfast team, one of the integral parts of their messaging is that there are opportunities from the Northern Ireland Protocol for either businesses investing in Northern Ireland or businesses already in Northern Ireland in terms of that dual market access. Obviously, we're in a bit of a turbulent period in the sense that it's the first 5 months of the implementation of both the protocol and the TCA, but it's something we're tracking. So as part of our research, one of the questions we ask is, are you looking to set up a business or take up warehousing space in the EU or in Northern Ireland? And that's something I think that is going to be a trend to keep an eye out for, particularly for retail and wholesale. Are these kinds of international companies going to be setting up in Northern Ireland? In terms of GB to NI trade, we focused on things like increasing awareness of the TSS, where we still feel there's not quite enough awareness amongst GB businesses of the help that's available, and also on things like the definition of at-risk goods, where there are still issues that stand there.
How can that opportunity for Northern Ireland be catalysed? And as I say, we're aware of people being told that potentially you need to have a footprint in the EU. How can Northern Ireland businesses, and how can we as a region better take advantage of that? And if GB businesses are being advised that that's what they should do, how do we filter them to attract that investment to here?
So I think a lot of it is getting the message out. There's understandably a lot of attention at the moment is on making sure the protocol works. There's less attention on what the potential opportunities might be. Mm-hmm. FSB is trying to draw attention to that. Individual businesses, I think, when they're talking to their suppliers, are also trying to draw attention to that. But it's going to be not a slow process, but it's going to take some time for that realization to sink in. And as companies are looking at reorganizing their supply chains potentially, I think that will be a scenario that does arise, and they might make use of that opportunity.
Okay, I'll hand back to the chair. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Claire. Okay, Sir Roger Gale, please.
Thank you very much indeed. If I could just editorialise for a moment and comment on something that Surin said earlier in terms of the lack of availability of staff. It'll be interesting to see, won't it, this weekend, bank holiday weekend, how many hotels can actually open. My understanding is that particularly in the Lake District, there is a desperate shortage of staff that hitherto either came from and lived here or would come from the European Union, who've now gone home and aren't available. And in my own constituency, Planet Earth, which is the largest greenhouse complex in Europe, is historically employing people from Romania and Poland. can't get pickers. And I think it's all very well for the government to say, well, we want you to train local people. I'm not quite sure how you can train a waitress or a chef between now and bank holiday Monday. But that aside, look, we've heard a litany, both from the previous panel and from yourselves this morning, about all the miseries of leaving the European Union. And as one who voted and campaigned for Remain, myself, I can't see Lord Frost anytime soon renegotiating any of the things that are causing you grief. And I think that's the harsh reality. So what I want to ask you, and I'll put this to James first, and then just go through the list, if I may, is for years and years, governments have been talking about encouraging SMEs to export. Now, I accept entirely, of course, that in the case of just-in-time products and perishable products, that's well nigh impossible outside Europe. So that rules out the pie trade and all sorts of things. But looking further afield, which we're now going to have to, can government do anything, and should government be doing anything to help SMEs to export to the wider market beyond Europe?
So thank you. I think it's a good question. And actually, our focus on this is actually away from FTAs. Our focus on how you can boost SME exporting is in the kind of business support that is in place from departments like the Department for International Trade. And now we've got quite a lot of ideas. So, I mean, we've spoken for years now about improving the International Trade Advisor Network that DIT operates. The regional performance of that is quite patchy. The contracts for the running of the system is outsourced by region, and you know the kind of advice that's on offer to small firms that's reported back to us can often be quite poor. So providing the right advice at the right time is a good one. The other is improving the kind of products that UK Export Finance offers. At the moment, export finance seems to largely be for large firms. It doesn't seem to work for small firms. So that would be something that could help take away some of the risk that small firms perceive in export. Also improving access to things like the Trade Show Access Programme. I think you can actually see good examples of similar schemes in Wales and Scotland that are paid for from devolved budgets that work quite well. But the Trade Show Access Programme that's available for English firms is actually quite poor. And that could be massively improved. A positive thing that the government's done recently is they've launched the export academies in certain regions of the UK. The early feedback we've had from them is good. That's something we'd like to see expanded. If you can provide small firms with the kind of guidance and advice that they need in the early stages of when they might be thinking about exporting, I think that's pretty vital. And beyond that, just instilling a kind of culture of thinking of exporting from the get-go would be really something we'd like to see. And then finally, a greater linkage between innovation and R&D and exporting. We see in some other countries, off the top of my head, I can think of Finland, where the export agency and the innovation agency are combined. Obviously, we don't have that in the UK, and there's sometimes a gap between putting in the R&D effort to produce a product and then making it marketable from an export perspective. And we'd like to see that linkage improved. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Søren.
Thank you. The overwhelming feedback we get from our members is that exporting should be viewed as a contact sport. It's about making contacts with customers and suppliers. And that's overwhelmingly that comes through in our research. So support to help businesses meet clients, meet suppliers can be really important. So one of the things James mentioned, access to trade shows, absolutely, but also things like trade missions as well. That's going to be really important to make on the ground contacts, both within you, but also in emerging markets as well. The second area we often hear about as well is the need to have on the ground face-to-face support in regions and nations across the UK. And that's really important, particularly for first-time exporters. And this includes things like covering initial cost for exporting, like market research into new markets, helping, again, subsidise trade missions, that sort of thing. I think looking at sort of practical level support will really help businesses, but also when we talk, I guess, more generally around trade deals, more timely guidance about what a trade deal means in practice will be really helpful to businesses who are looking to export, particularly for the first time.
Thanks very much. Russell.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what James and Suren have said. I think actually I can underline how important it is. I think we've recently undertaken analysis for our Seize the Moment campaign that our DG Tony Danker launched on Monday, and actually it found that the UK could capture £20 billion by 2030 if 50% of SMEs who state they have products suitable for exports actually reach the current average export levels of SMEs. So there's a huge prize in that. Just to add on, I mean, James and Suren have gone through the examples. I think one to add on that is actually, and the members of Parliament on this call, I'm sure, are very well up to date with their trade policy, but actually rolling out kind of upskilling program for MPs as well, just so when they're having conversations with their constituents and small businesses in their constituencies, they understand the issues and understand the routes to how those SMEs can actually export. So I think that's I'll add it on a long list, shopping list that we've kind of outlined, but I think that's one to add.
That's very helpful. When Liam Fox was at the department, heading the department, he held regular briefings for members of Parliament, breakfast briefings with his top staff to enable us to do exactly some of the things that you've said are missing. Since Liam left, I don't detect that that is happening. And what you've told me this morning is very worrying indeed, because it suggests that what we're being told isn't getting down to the grassroots. And we need to do something about that. And that's something we'll have to put into the report. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Sir Roger. And I could, what Russell said as well, I would really, as a relatively new MP, that would be very useful for me. That's not been part of my experience, to be honest, and to be informing people on the ground would be really useful. Right, really useful evidence all around. I'm going to ask one question to close and go through each of you. Actually, just done some really basic maths. If we know that the UK government's SME support fund is worth 20 million, and we also know that there are 5.94 million SMEs in the UK, that brings you to a grand total of £3.37p rounded up per SME. Given that that is not a considerable sum, is it fair to come to the conclusion that SMEs have just been an afterthought in this government's trade policy? And Russell, if I could start with you, please.
I don't think that's necessarily a helpful way of seeing things. Listen, I think a lot of the challenges in the new relationship are shared by businesses regardless of size. Obviously, as has been outlined over the past 2 hours, SMEs and the issues they face are particularly acute. I think we are seeing the government listen and engage with the issues, but I think, as we've discussed time and time again, there are structural issues in the TCA that will mean that, you know, there will be additional costs and additional burdens, and it will be difficult for SMEs to adapt to those. So I think that would be my out. I don't think there's been it's been an afterthought. I think it is symptomatic of the new trading relationship and where we are at the moment.
Thanks, Russell. And Suren?
I mean, I agree with you first, but that the SME support fund is too small. It should be much bigger than it is. But I guess on a broader point, I mean, we're looking at it slightly differently in the sense that I think the challenge with trade policy, we're seeing with the TCA and we're seeing with the UK-US trade deal discussion, there's a challenge between this, the 1,000-feet view from governments and the political view around the trade deal and the on-the-ground impact for businesses. I'm trying to understand the implications of a trade deal or a new trade policy. I think the government has struggled to close that gap. And I think it, again, is that advice gap, looking at, local stakeholders like Chambers of Commerce, for example, to help close that gap. That's going to be really important because, of course, it's businesses that trade, not governments, that needs to be remembered when we look at these deals going forward.
Thank you very much indeed. And James.
Thank you. And I'd support what's been said on the SME Brexit Support Fund. I think with the 5 million figure, we have to remember that not all those SMEs are going to be viable for exporting. So it is a smaller number that will be looking to access the fund, but we think it could be expanded. We think the eligibility requirements could be loosened. We've already talked about the requirement to only have ever traded with the EU. That's far too restrictive in our opinion. In terms of SMEs and trade policy, so in terms of our engagement with DIT, we've been actually very impressed with DIT's ability to listen to what we think SMEs need to see in the UK's future trade policy. They've been very willing to listen to our arguments on SME chapters, on digital trade chapters, what might benefit SMEs there. The TCA obviously falls underneath a different department under the Cabinet Office. Because of that, at times we've had to argue a bit more firmly for things like the SME chapter, which wasn't in the UK's original negotiating objectives. But as has been said in this session, we feel that government is listening. The Brexit Fund has been brought in. We've worked extensively with government on things like producing guidance that works for SMEs. There's a lot more to be done. But no, I wouldn't say that SMEs are an afterthought. I'm not sure that's the right way of describing it.
Okay. Right, well, to close everybody, and in that very brief intervening period, I've been fact-checked. Of that 5.94 million, 10% of them are exporting SMEs. That means it's actually about £30 per SME. So I think there is a question there about some. But thank you very much indeed, and forgive me for coming in being an opposition politician and not being a chair for a very brief moment. Really grateful to everyone for their contributions. Personally, I found that extremely useful, both to have the business witnesses in the first instance, and then to have your interpretation as trade bodies representatives. Thank you very much indeed, Diolch yn fawr iawn. See everybody soon.